Well, welcome to Biophilic Design Interactive. There are 3 of us presenting today, and you'll notice there's 2 of us up here. Julia is almost here and stuck in traffic. She's our local person. Sometimes it takes the person the closest to get, the longest to get here. But we are speaking in order, and Julia's actually taking the last piece of our 2-hour slot. So she'll definitely be here in time for her presentation. So with me is Katie Ryan, Director of Projects from Terrapin Bright Green. I'm Amanda Sturgeon from the International Living Future Institute. And today we're going to bring you Biophilic Design Interactive, research tools and tech. So we're going to have some fun together today with some interactive ideas around how we engage with biophilic design. These are our learning objectives. And our agenda, we've got 2 hours together, so we've broken this up into some interactive pieces, and there's basically three slots to today. So I'm going to start out giving a context of biophilic design, how some of these tools fit into an overall initiative that the 3 of us are part of called the Biophilic Design Initiative, and stretch beyond. I will share with you an interactive map that we're releasing today. And then I will hand it over to Katie, who will talk about research and storytelling tools and some really great sort of computer-based virtual reality technologies. And then we will hand it over to Julia, who will be here by then, to talk about scent augmented reality and making the case for biophilic design. So we'll roughly divide up into thirds. And we'll have time probably in between each of our transitions for questions around those pieces, but we'll also have a slot at the end for questions as well. So that's our outline. With that, I'm going to kick off. It's a little awkward to sit on these stools for 2 hours, so we're going to step off the stage as we are not speaking. All right, so about 2 years ago, we formed a Biophilic Design Initiative. As I said, the 3 of us are part of that. And the idea is that we saw a lot of conversation and incredible work going on around the biophilic design topic, but not a lot of collaboration and partnership. And we felt that if we partnered and collaborated more, that we would be able to do more with biophilic design to really get mass adoption of it. So the initiative was formed. I think it was at Greenville 2 years ago, asked a bunch of people to just sit down and chat, and everybody was really enthusiastic about, well, why don't we form an initiative group where we can just work more formally together. Came together really easily. These are the different sort of organizations, folks that are engaged in the initiative, and this is our list, our team, as well as Katie from Terrapin Bright Green, Bill Browning, David Gerson, who was just left interface flooring, now with Inkscape, Judy Heerwagen with GSA, Vivian Loftness, Carnegie Mellon, Mary Davidge from Google, Nicole Isle from GlueMac, Richard Piercentini from Phipps Conservatory, Sonia Bocart, who's giving a session at the same time as this on biophilic design, by the way, and Julia Africa. So it's been a great group. We have come together with all of the different pieces we were doing around biophilic design and focused on how we could identify where the gaps are, where the opportunities are for biophilic design, what tools are needed, and we sort of broke it down into sort of 3 different areas. That there's more research needed, there's some great research, but some more needed. There was a real dire need for some education, interactive education, as well as webinars and such. And there was a really huge need for developing tools and resources, and some of that is what we'll talk about today. In particular, we realized that there was just a handful of case studies available. And we're looking at architects and designers trying to do this work who are predominantly visual thinkers. To have no sort of visual case studies to reference, we felt it was a real barrier. So we were fortunate enough to be able to get some funding for this work at the Institute. We had this idea. We had started to do some of this work. We created really sort of a business plan for how we might transition all of these gaps in biophilic design over 90 days, a year, and 5 years. And then we started looking for some funding support that could actually help staff this at the Institute so that we could dig into this work and actually have it resourced. So we were really fortunate to get a grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. We got this grant a few months ago, well, in the summer. It's a 2-year grant for us to really scale up this work. And we've been able to hire a couple of staff at the Institute. So now, rather than just our group, which is an incredible group, but also a very busy group, doing it sort of on a volunteer basis, we're able to actually have it staffed. So our objectives are to scale biophilic design, move the ideas into the mainstream, develop innovative ideas and widespread adoption. And we'll be doing that through a series of interactive forums, really deep dives into academic education, how-to guides, partnerships, whole suite of initiatives. The current projects, were any of you at the Stephen Kellett Award last night? One lonely person. Oh, couple. So with this identification that case studies were really lacking, we were really struggling with how we could get more case studies. They're very time-consuming to do all the research for a project and contact the teams and gather all the information. And we thought if we had an award program that perhaps we could get project teams to come to us with images and project details, and that's what we did. We announced the winner last night and did our inaugural Biophilic Design Award program in honor of Stephen R. Kellett, who sadly passed away about a year ago. We also realized that we needed more visual case studies, as I mentioned, and so those have been released as of yesterday in a book that I authored, Creating Biophilic Buildings. It is available downstairs at our booth, and it has 14 different case studies in it that from around the world. There are several in the US, but we also have a project in Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. And it's just really the starting point for case studies. These 14 projects, because we house the Living Building Challenge at our institute, and we require biophilic design in that program, we were able to go to projects that are part of the Living Building Challenge. They've already said we're doing the Living Building Challenge, or they're certified, and they have already gone through the steps of addressing biophilic design and reporting on biophilic design. So we were able to quickly gather information from this group of projects. It was an easy project group to start with. But we really do see this as sort of the starting point for gathering case studies and examples around biophilic design. All of the projects in the book are organized around Stephen Kellett's elements and attributes. So Stephen Kellett, along with others, outlined this sort of wide range of biophilic design elements and really cataloged all the aspects of how humans and nature interact. And they broke down for him into 6 different categories. And there's been variations on this since. Terrapin have got a fabulous overview of this that summarizes into 14 patterns. They're all really great resources. But because within the Living Building Challenge we require teams to really look at Kellett's 6 elements, we cataloged in the book along that same framework. So the 6 elements: environmental features, things that you know about already, to think about how people connect with buildings and nature, things like plants, animals, water, much easier to understand concepts. Natural shapes and forms, natural patterns and processes, light and space, place-based relationships, and evolved human nature relationships. So each project, I'll run through a couple of case studies here, and I'll start with the most local case study in the book, the R.W. Kern Center, which is out at Hampshire College in Western Mass. And this project is seeking Living Building Challenge certification. It will be attempting to get certified early next year. And with each project, I highlighted 3 of the elements that you just saw, 3 of the 6, and really tried to diversify each project so that there's a whole range of different biophilic design strategies illustrated in the book. So for the Kern Center, environmental features is highlighted, and within that, several of the attributes underneath those elements are highlighted. Light and space, and natural patterns and processes. Now, it didn't mean that these case studies may have done other things within those biophilic design strategies well. It was really just being able to highlight some of those features and really show a diverse group of strategies around biophilic design in each project. And the Kern Center, if you're regional, is a great building to visit and is really a project that is almost like a poem written by, I think, the general contractor, Jonathan Wright, to his subcontractors, is what Bill Curran, who's the funder of the project, would call it. It's a remarkable project. One of my personal favorite projects in the book, and probably of all time, that's engaged with our Living Building Challenge program, is Te Kuraware, also known as the Cultural Center for the Tuhoi Maori. The Tuhoi Maori had their land taken from them without their consent. They did not sign an agreement to hand over their land. And many, many decades later, that was acknowledged, and they were given a settlement by the New Zealand government, a financial settlement, and all the land was returned to the Tuhoi people. Although actually now the thousands of acres that's a national park in the Tuhoi territory is now owned by nobody. It has its own rights, and it's one of the first real initiatives that look at the concept of people owning land really not making a lot of sense, especially for the way that the Tuhoi people think. So the Tuhoi people will be stewarding this land. Together with the return of their land, they also got a financial settlement. And the tribal elders felt what was really needed in this community was to restore a sense of pride and hope in a community that was pretty desperate and had a lot of poverty, and most people had no work, and decided a cultural center would really create that. So for me, biophilic design is as much about a connection between people and their culture as well as people and nature. And this project really exemplifies a place-based response. It also uses motifs and stories from the Tuhoi Maori, an expression of the project. All of the timber was pulled from forests and managed by the tribe themselves. There was a mud brick process where the whole community came and built this building together, training people to do jobs. So this is an example of a couple of projects within the book. I mentioned that we've also been doing the award program, that we did the winner last night. And the winner actually was the Kutek Quat Hospital in Singapore. We had over 20 entries from 4 different countries. And this hospital is a remarkable example of how you bring nature in to really create a healing environment in a hospital. Something we don't often see here in the States in terms of how we think about hospitals really contributing towards people getting better faster. So one of the other initiatives that gives you sort of an overview of some of the activities we've been doing and the resources that we're releasing. One of the things we're also releasing today is an ability for us to crowdsource different biophilic design projects around the world, share them with each other, and be able to comment on them. And that's being released in what we're calling the Biophilic Design Map. It's available right now at the URL, and it's not working incredibly well on a phone, but if you have a laptop or a tablet, I'd encourage you to go to the link and take a look. All the projects that entered our Biophilic Design Awards, and many of the projects in the book, are already populated in the map. And the idea of the map is that anybody, anywhere in the world, can start to put in biophilic design projects. You can submit a project and upload images and talk about its biophilic design features, and then other people can sign in and see it and like that project, share it on social media. So we want to walk through with you the map a little bit. And as I said, those of you with a laptop or a tablet, please try to follow along with us. But first, I'm just going to show a video.
What if we could experience the same physical and emotional benefits of moving through an urban landscape that we experience when walking through nature? There are projects all over the world that are working towards broad adoption of biophilic design, and this is why we created the Biophilic Design Map. The map is an interactive tool created with you in mind. The tool consists of case studies and built examples which have implemented biophilic design at the core of their process. Here you can explore submitted biophilic projects, take a look at images, and learn about how the teams have integrated elements and attributes into their designs. You can recommend and like your favorite examples, share them on social media, and also join the discussion. The map was created to house our global biophilic community. Each user can create a profile to not only track comments, recommendations, and followers, but also find interesting discussions, follow your fellow community members, and dive into biophilic design. Join us in our mission to make broad adoption of biophilic design a reality. Explore the map, create your profile, share your favorite projects, and also enter your own biophilic design.
Okay, so that was a little overview of the map, and now we'll walk through a little bit more and demonstrate it. I think if I click to the next slide, we'll give it a minute to come up. We're going to just connect to it, and we can walk through it, and please follow along. Like I said, if you have a laptop or a tablet, you can try it on your phone. But when we were trying it this morning, it wasn't a couple little tweaks to make. All right, so this was the project that won the Stephen Kellett Biophilic Design Award last night. This is populated in the map, and you can see, you can scroll through different pictures of the project. You can then scroll down and see all the different features, biophilic design features, and these are also organized in the elements and attributes that I showed you before, of Stephen Kellett. In this case, the project information talks about light and space, different attributes, place-based relationships, and evolved human-nature relationships. And then you can see that at the end of that, you can then recommend this project, and you can share it on social media, Twitter or Facebook. All right, going back to the map. You're going to go back to the map, Joanna, and do another project. Are people able to pull it up, those that have a laptop? Playing around with it a little bit? So our staff have been busy populating projects over the last few weeks in order to have a bunch of projects in there. But we encourage you all to put in your favorite project that connects you with nature that you've visited. And you can see some of our international projects. We'll go to the Bullitt Center, which is the space that I work in every day. You might see some of our staff in here. Great images of the project, and then information about its biophilic design attributes and features. We've already had some of our staff comment in there and talk about how they like working in the project. So same, you can recommend it if you like it, of course, and share it on social media. And we'll just look at one more project. We're going to look at one of our projects, I think, in Australia. We're in Greenland right now. All right. We'll look at the Sustainable Buildings Research Center, which is a project that's in the Creating Biophilic Buildings book. And this is a project that's also seeking Living Building Challenge certification. An incredible project that really has a very close affiliation to its place. Its climate, which is reasonably hot, and really seeks to shade the building and respond to its climate. So there's descriptions of how the project does that, different biophilic design attributes, how it creates inside-outside spaces, and a spirit of place. And then again, if you like the project, you can recommend it and share it. So we really encourage this map will only be as good as everyone here and beyond, adding projects and getting engaged with it. So if you've got a passion for biophilic design, this could be a real great go-to resource. And the idea for creating this map really came out of, I think it might have been a year ago, when the Biophilic Design Initiative met at last year's Greenbuild. And I think it was Vivian Lofness, perhaps, or one of us, that came up with the idea and said, you know, if we had this map where people could see biophilic design projects everywhere, we could really build this understanding of what biophilic design is. All right, so, oops. As well as that, we will be releasing a lot more biophilic design tools and resources. We'll be releasing, I think, today, a really great resource for our Living Building Challenge teams in particular that outlines how you might run biophilic design workshops. This website is going to be updated continually as we do all of these different aspects of our grant with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and there will be more resources coming over the next year in particular. So I encourage you to check back as we add resources to this website and links, and also send us comments and thoughts on anything else that we can add around biophilic design that would help all of you to implement it more thoroughly. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Katie. We now have Julia here with us, so that's great. All right, go to the next slide.
Amanda. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming today. Guys, does it show your both screens? The notes? All right. No notes today. Amanda gave us a little background on some of the new tools that we're working with at the initiative, and I would like to spend the next 30 minutes walking through some of the technologies and methodologies that we're using to express those experiences in other ways, in more interactive or multisensory ways. So before we begin, though, I'd like us all, did everyone receive a little black bio dot when they walked in the door? If you haven't done so already, could you place it on your wrist or lower arm, somewhere comfortable? Once you've placed it, though, don't move it, because the adhesive will stop working. So just put it here, and you can put one or both on. Doesn't really matter. So I'd like to start by doing a quick little immersion exercise once everyone has their dots on. Just 2 short video clips. So if you can just put your attention all in the videos, we can move forward. Okay, so I noticed some people were actually filming the film. So I hope you get a chance to watch that again, maybe. But now if you could look at your biodots and see what color are they. It may not work for everyone. It's also kind of chilly outside, but perhaps some of us can see whether the color is blue or green, red or black. And if you can't see it, if it's too dark, go ahead and turn your phones on to look with the flashlight. But there is a subtle difference between green and blue. Okay, so now we have part 2. Has everyone got their color? Remember your color? All right. Okay, so now look at your biodots again. Is it a different color than before? Some of them may not be working, but some people might actually see expressed differences. Is it different from your neighbors? Go ahead and ask each other, like, what color. Okay, I didn't think that would inspire so much conversation. So if we could raise your hand if it changed colors. I'm actually really curious to know if it changed colors. So a few, not too many, and it stayed the same color for most people. And who just had black the whole time? So. Sorry, yeah. So I have one more question before we move on. Raise your hand if you think the traffic video was longer. Okay, so maybe 40%, 30% of the people here? And if you think the cherry blossom video was longer? Okay, considerably fewer. Maybe 6 people? How many people thought it was the same length? Okay, you are correct. They were exactly the same length, down to the second. So the point of this exercise was to consider not just the visual experience and the psychological experience of the built environment, but to also take time to think about the physiological response to those inputs, to the stimuli. And our neurological systems experience places and spaces at a physiological level. So stressful experiences triggered by sensory input from the built environment, including sound and smells, can affect our bodies without our volition and oftentimes without conscious recognition. So as design practitioners and owners and decision makers, we ask, what is worth measuring? What technologies are available for us in understanding those measurements? And how can we then document and communicate what matters to us? The equipment and data analytics that are often available through clinical lab research are hard to access for the average person. They are expensive to operate, and they are time-consuming to analyze. These barriers contribute to the 17-year average time lapse or time gap it takes between research and uptake in practice, mainstream practice. But wearable technology is beginning to reduce that lag time, as is this line between evidence-based practice in research and practice-based evidence. So hopefully they will begin to merge in a more harmonious and informative cyclical process. Quickly, I wanted to just point out some key factors in how we look at research today, especially with respect to biophilic design. Evidence-based practice integrates research evidence with clinical experience, clinical expertise, and client values in what is often a very controlled environment. But biophilic design has long been very much a cornerstone, evidence-based practice has been a cornerstone of biophilic design. The challenge is that controlled environments are not our reality, and people are complex beings. So what are the options for us in considering how we do research and get results that are of real value to us? Practice-based evidence alternatively looks at design interventions that are derived largely from positive cultural and community and climatic issues. So they're very place-based. And those are factors that are essential for recognizing and creating biophilic experiences. The design community employs both methods of research, and I think what we need to consider then is what's valued both by the client and the community, and in keeping a healthy and productive ecological system. What might be common indicators of health that are measured, in our experience, we're seeing a lot on heart rate, view preference, brainwave monitoring, and then light quality and attention, attendance, behavior, and various other indicators of health and well-being. But industry engagement and new technology are, again, changing the way we engage with science and utilize evidence in favor of healthful design. So some of the trends that we're seeing are in the creation of innovation labs, much like the transition lab, but also more at the physical and built environment, whereby less control is forced upon the built environment. Urban spaces are being utilized for piloting biophilic design concepts, mapping cognitive performance, and other physiological responses. They've become more immersive environments that really take different spins on research and technology. and but ultimately they're all geared towards improving the occupant or urban experience, largely with the integration of lessons learned from nature. So the other really interesting trend is that efforts that in these innovation labs and other trends are showing a uniting of issues and industries across all sectors that have long been researched independently. And so sound and vibration and textiles and the tactile experience and how that might affect the occupant experience itself. So we're interested in this because of the opportunity for actively participating in the growing body of knowledge to inform decision-making and ultimately grow the consumer demand for biophilic experiences. I believe that if with greater consumer demand, we'll actually have more opportunities to build biophilic communities at all levels, from the interior space to the entire cities. So the two areas that we are looking at, the two technologies that we're looking at, are engaging with different owners, operators, and from different industries, and it's kind of exciting for us to work with product manufacturers and hoteliers and a number of other people who are interested in the same thing, but we go about it in different ways. And so the two areas that we are currently looking at with some of our collaborators are in virtual reality and neural mapping. So I'm going to talk about each of those next. The virtual reality technology has been around for decades, and I actually recall the first time I was in a VR flight simulator at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California in 1992. And the large areas of neon green were representing the grass. And so it wasn't, it's evolved a lot since then. And so, but to couple that, the recent developments in the multi-billion-dollar industry or market of smartphones and game engines and other wearable technologies have made those tools much more accessible to the average consumer, both tech enthusiasts, designers, and the citizen scientists alike. So for instance, the 360-degree cameras and viewers are becoming much more affordable. They, along with screen presentations, such as going to the movie theater, and then more projection in immersive caves are kind of the three main ways that we see VR being used today. Some people may be familiar with 360-degree viewing or images. They're, I think, most commonly seen on like Google Maps or in social media. The price points for those technologies are largely based on the comfort of the headsets or the image quality of both the camera and the headsets. So, but it's not hard to imagine how these technologies will continue to improve and evolve, and 360-degree cameras may soon be standard issue in smartphones, for example. So the applications are quite widespread across many industries, and but what's important here is that the 360-degree cameras, the VR headsets, they don't measure anything. They are mechanisms for conveying and documenting experiences. So that, though, is why I see so much potential in broadening awareness for biophilic design, including improving sensory connectivity, environmental stewardship, and just biophilic design in general. The VR has the capability of bringing experiences to students, designers, patients, building owners, policymakers, anybody really, in a way that it can help inspire, heal, educate. So that the possibilities seem quite diverse. However, the libraries of visual stimuli, or visual and sensory features for biophilic design, ones that really have the nature-based design cues that are paired with the human experience, are really limited compared to other industries like in fitness or in gaming. So this may be because the experience of nature is hard to monetize, but we see that adopting this tech, in adopting this tech, we do want to think about what message it is we're trying to convey. It's not just an opportunity to improve navigation or understand the aesthetic of a space, the dynamic lighting, and so on, which are all important, but it's also an opportunity to inspire feelings of tranquility, curiosity, and awe. And through interactive design process with technology like this, we can strive for more positive physiological outcomes in light of predictive challenges like climate change, for example. So 360-degree images have been around for a little while, but if you're not familiar with the technology, often on like Google Maps, you can text to Green Acre right now, 77948, and you'll get the MP4 video on your screen. We've actually stripped out the sound so that if multiple people were doing it in here now, you wouldn't have giant waterfall sounds everywhere. But it gives you can actually pan around and see it from different spaces. And if you were to wear the headset to go with it, you would feel much more like you're actually in that space. I would encourage you all to visit the ILFI booth later. We will have a headset for people to try on with this video and others, different urban and interior spaces, to give you an idea of what that looks like. So my question then is whether case studies and the crowdsourcing map that Amanda showed us could eventually incorporate this kind of documentation of a space or experience. And I'd like to think of it this way. If you had a project that was inspired by a Japanese tea garden, taking the team or the project owner to visit the Japanese tea garden may not be in your project budget. So how might the multisensory VR experience of that garden inform or influence your design process? So this is not a real case study that's on the ILFI website yet, but I'd like everyone here to now think about an experience with nature that you've wanted to replicate in your design or your community, stories that you've tried to tell, or interactions with spaces or places that really you've struggled to communicate through words or static imagery. Just think about an actual experience if you can. And then think about how the VR technology could improve the messaging to inspire the creation of authentic biophilic spaces. How does that become a communication tool? So in a brief activity now, I'm hoping everyone could take 2 or 3 minutes to turn to your neighbor and discuss your ideas. Consider which other capabilities, sets such as like inserting those multisensory experiences, different stimuli, to further enhance the communication of that experience. So 2 or 3 minutes If you just maybe talk to one person next to you, or if you know somebody who's actually on a project team with you here, maybe talk about what that might, how those tools might actually enhance that project. So glad to see there's so much engaged conversation. Hopefully this will continue after the session. I'm just going to continue now and use the last few minutes to talk about the physiological or neural mapping of the biophilic experience. Neural mapping uses non-invasive electrophysiological monitoring methods to record electrical activity in the brain. This is often used to determine how changes in your physical environment or your surroundings in general can affect your state of mind. Recent developments in mobile electroencephalography, or EEG headsets, much easier to say, are drastically improving the accessibility and turnaround time of traditionally clinical data collection methods. And it's kind of exciting to see where it's going, although right now I think the tools are more common in the gaming and fitness industry. But there are a variety of EEG headsets available today at reasonable prices, and the difference in the pricing and the application tends to be on monitoring capabilities and how the user might actually employ the technology. Some can actually be 3D printed. Some headsets, most components of the headset can be 3D printed. Some come with really cost-effective and user-friendly research tools, or semi-user-friendly research tools. And then some come, and that software can auto-generate data that we can actually, hopefully, use to apply to our own designs and ideas for the built environment. The primary difference in pricing and price points between products like these is around comfort. Wearing those headsets for long periods of time can be a little irritating. The number of data points and the dependability of the connection nodes to the skin. But one thing to say is that the more nodes there are, the more likely it requires a skilled research analysts. So this is one of the, like an app that gets paired with the headset, and it helps translate the brainwaves into data that we can interpret better. We've found in our own practice that for us at least, more than two mental states or mental characteristics, each color indicates a different mental characteristic. But to have more than two gets a little muddy, and it's a little bit more difficult for the average person to really understand what to do with that information. So still, I think there's lots of room for improvement, but it's really kind of exciting to see how directly we can take the experience with just having a headset and an app, walk through a space, and understand how it might be affecting our minds. So one other thing I would say is that it's really important to consider when you're actually using this technology that outside stimuli like scent and sound that we heard earlier can affect brain frequencies, and that is picked up by the EEG headsets. So this, as a tool, it can be very subjective data when it's not part of a larger project with many participants. But in application, it has a whole range of applications, and I think market research in gaming and personal wellness are kind of where the money's going right now. But examples in architecture and design and urban planning are beginning to emerge, which kind of gets us excited. And one really great example of that is the Cloud Lab's neurocartography project. And I'm just going to talk on this briefly because it has been an inspiration for Terrapin, at least in our own work. And so this example, or this photo, is just a screenshot of a video that they have on their website, the Cloud Lab GSAP through Columbia University. And the participants wore these headsets. They used a very simple two-mode headset to walk through the neighborhood of Dumbo in Brooklyn. And the blue indicates measures of being in a meditative state, and the red measures indicate attention. And so what's mapped here is showing an overlay of all the participants and how at intersections we begin to see that there's a lot more attention needed, which is not surprising. But I would encourage you to go to the website and actually watch the video, and it shows how the meditative versus attention states change over as people walk through the space. But so projects like this, and they've actually applied the same strategy to an area in Seoul, Korea. So the idea is gaining traction, and I think the applications for urban planning and design are really quite exciting. So for us, what does this mean for Terrapin and the work that we're doing to support the Biophilic Design Initiative? We took a second look at some of the biophilic research that we've done in the recent past, one of which was this open space survey that looked at lunch goers and in small urban pocket parks and street parks. And just in quick overview, the people who, 26% of the people surveyed had walked more than a quarter of a mile to get to the park on the left. With no plantings, no redeeming qualities really, except perhaps some of the architectural features. Then 51% of the people surveyed had actually walked more than a quarter of a mile to get to the space on the right. And so without getting into further detail on the study itself, my question was, what experiences are being sought in each location? Is it connection with other people? Is it connection with nature? Is it a little bit of both? Is there something else at play? And while our survey didn't actually get into those details, the neural headsets are an opportunity to start looking at what the physiological experiences are encountered in each of those spaces. So we went ahead and trialed the headset just to kind of to understand what the capabilities were, to understand what the challenges were, and so we went through those same spaces, and wearing a 5-mode, 6-channel, I actually get the two confused, but there's multiple points on Dakota's head there that are touching and reading his brainwaves. So the results look a little bit like this. The app translates it to these two different data readouts. The one on the left shows, it's a little hard to read. The lines are really thin, but each line indicates a different state of mind. And then on the right, it shows the output for the 3 different parks. Now, this is just one individual. We're not looking to compare anything here. But the idea is that this software can actually aggregate data from multiple participants. So if we had a study that had 30 or 40 or 50 people, we could actually start looking at where the trends are and how that might inform the biophilic experience of a space or a park. So the second study that we took a second look at was the hospitality study that we've talked about in the past, and it was more of a naturalistic observation where we went into hotel lobbies and observed the behavior of people in transition within the space. We found that 36% of guests spent more time in biophilic lobbies than they spent in conventional lobbies with few to no biophilic qualities. And then we also found that more people exhibited active use of biophilic lobbies, like as in hosting informal meetings, than they did in conventional lobbies, which were more likely to be just transitory spaces. So using that framework, our next plan, our hope, is to take the neural headsets and in collaboration with the Cloud Lab, and Gensler and Interface actually have all been a part of this effort, to look at the hotel lobby, look at the experience of the urban street, like Times Square, for example, and then Central Park. And the hope is that we can start to identify trends in the response to each of these three urban spaces, identify whether there are correlations between heart rate and brainwave data, and then also see if there's response time from one space to what is the response time and change in your state of mind between one space and another. How quickly does it happen? How quickly does our heart rate or our brain waves change based on the physical and multisensory environment? So that kind of wraps up my presentation. I would like to hand it over to Julia now. Yeah. Oh, yeah, actually, before I do, these tools are really, we see them as opportunities for communicating a story, and ideally, eventually, having data points to enhance that story. So I encourage you guys to try these technologies, and there'll be an opportunity at the ILFI booth to ask more questions. But if you have some immediate questions about this particular section of the presentation, we have a few minutes that we can host a question or two. There will be another opportunity to ask questions at the end of the event. But if you have something specific to these two technologies, I can field it now. No? Okay. Ooh, one. Go for it. Oh.
Just a quick question, thank you. My question is about some of this neural mapping technology. Obviously, there's a difference between looking through like a virtual reality tool and being in a physical space. But do you find that you maybe have as effective results with the neural mapping tool with users looking at images as opposed to being in a physical space? So if you're going through a design process and kind of testing people's reactions to something versus, you know, here you're in Central Park, here's the space we already built and it doesn't quite work, or, you know, causes stress. So just curious on that.
Generally speaking, the real place is going to have a stronger output than looking at just a static image or a video. There's still value to that, but you're missing the multisensory experience, the spatial experience as well is going to be different than if you're just in a room. Viewing the images, just like we were doing earlier in this session where we're just watching a video. We're not physically there. We're in a kind of surreal underwater experience right now. It's not a true indication of what your response will be, but it's certainly it's an indicator. So if that is what you're limited to, I would certainly encourage you to use that framework. And then that next step is going out there. And the challenge is that there are so many more potential interferences or different variables that can either interfere or skew the results when you are actually out in the real complex world.
So when you're doing the neural mapping, there were like 6 or 8 different kinds of metrics or states being observed, like engagement, interest. Is the idea that you're trying to curate an experience where you're targeting different human reactions to the what you're going through, as so you're trying to design someone's way of interacting with the place and identifying which are desirable experiences or which are undesirable, and I'm just trying to get my head around what is the end goal of the work.
Our goal has not been to curate. However, I do see that as the direction that we would want to head. The technology needs to improve a little bit. It's not quite there yet, although if you go into much more structured spaces and with the high-end tech, you might be able to achieve that. I know there are labs out there that do focus on that, but again, not everyone has access to that. So for us in the interim, it's really understanding how the existing spaces are impacting us. Ideally, in the future, that'll evolve into something a little bit more refined, so that it can help inform the design process more directly.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else we can address later? But Julia.
Hello, everyone. Just to dovetail back to that previous question, all visual processing is cross-modal. Well, all processing, sensory processing is cross-modal. So even if you were in a virtual reality headset and you had no audio input, no other sensory input, the reception of that visual stimulus would carry over and light up different areas of the brain that are related to sound and to smell, because the brain is a comparison machine, a complex computer in that way, insofar as it's always comparing to previous experiences. So yes, it will not be as good as the real thing, because it will be lacking all of those other dimensions of sensory stimulus, which are part of the information context. But it will also trigger some of the previous experiences that the brain will have had. And in that way, more experienced virtual reality researchers, and I am not one, would be able to say that it will provide a kind of a testing ground for a proving ground even for those early responses that you may want to get from your clients and occupants. My name is Julia Africa. I'm sorry I was late this morning. I missed my exit on the freeway and went to the airport instead of the seaport, and then came back here. It took about a half an hour. But I'm here now, and I work at the intersection of biophilic design and public health. I used to work at the Harvard School of Public Health. Now I don't. And I'm going to pick up where Katie left off to talk about 2 different kinds of technology that are used to analyze biophilic design environments, 2 different strategies. And then the final third of my presentation will be devoted to helping you think about some strategies to improve or enhance the value proposition of biophilic design. And what we'd like to do is have at least 15 or 20 minutes at the end for questions, but also a conversation with you as part of the larger biophilic design initiative effort about how it is that we can increase adoption by increasing the recognition of the benefits of biophilic design. And I think that will be a rich experience for us all, at least I hope it will be. Bottom-up visual processing is a term that refers to a way of analyzing the structural components in an image. Bottom-up visual processing is compared to the inverse of top-down visual processing. So when you're looking bottom-up, you're looking at the individual structural features in an image. Top-down would be looking at the entire context, the narrative that the holistic picture tells. This picture is taken from a study by Mary Carroll Hunter. They were looking at gardens and landscape preference, that is, how to look at design features in a garden setting, and how to take a large data set of images, have people rank them according to preference, and then feed those into a computer and have the computer analyze the structural features that came out most highly ranked in those preference structures. And you could do the same thing with the biophilic design environment, and I think people are trying to. But using this large data, I want to provoke you to question this morning, is this a true indicator of how appealing the image is? Let's see. This slide is taken from a study by Melanie Mitchell. She wrote a very influential book called Analogy Making as Perception and Computer Vision. This study, Active Object Localization in Visual Situations, was an attempt to demonstrate the difficulties in teaching a computer to see what we see. In this instance, she took the example of dog walking. That's the relationship at the top. And she gave the computer the schematic. You have a person, a dog walker, holding a leash that's attached to a dog, and the action is dog walking. They're united by this action. And she fed the computer endless examples. People running with their dogs, a person on a bike with dogs on multiple leashes, a person with a dog in a baby stroller. And she asked in her own words, or the stated goal in her own words was, our goal is a system that can, via analogy, fluidly map its knowledge of a particular abstract visual concept to a wide variety of novel instances, while being able to both explain its mapping and to measure how stretched that mapping is. We hypothesize that using prior knowledge of a situation's expected structure, as well as situation-relevant context as it is dynamically perceived, will allow the system to be accurate and efficient at localizing relevant objects. And in simpler terms, this is a way of saying that she was asking the computer to identify whether a given example is dog walking or analogous to the relationship structure of dog walking, but how far from actual dog walking it is. Is this dog walking? Or is it a new variant or a new condition? The point here is that computers are not very good at making analogies. They're not very good at divining relationship structures. They have a great many powerful capacities that may exceed our own, that currently do exceed our own in some settings. This is one area where they're not very good, and actually where it's difficult to teach them to be as good as we are. So reading resonance and context is something that you as designers and architects are still superior in. And when we design these environments for clients, we need to take the data that we get from these wonderful research experiments, but remember that the poetic imagination of landscape and meaning and narrative is something that we still can read far better than any of these data processing techniques. A couple of examples, fire, water, common biophilic design elements that are, could be in any pattern that you choose, whether you're using the Terrapin system or Stephen Kellert's or whoever's. This is Horsetail Falls in Yosemite. Every February, the cast of the light hits the waterfall in a certain way. It makes it look like molten fire flowing down the mountain, or water and earth. Or Undulatus aspiratus, the newest entrant to the cloud atlas, and it's likened to viewing a roughened sea surface from below. It's a type of cloud pattern which is apparently linked to climate change. It's a storm formation that is considered a relatively new pattern. So what's interesting about this is a computer might look at that and not see the sea in the clouds. This is what I tend to think of as biophilic analogy, the poetic imagination. This is an important component of designing these biophilic environments. It's not just which of the 14 patterns you choose. It's how you tell the story. Nor would a computer see the dread or anxiety that someone else might feel when looking at that cloud and thinking that that's related to changing atmospheric conditions or the potential for their community to be impacted negatively. And finally, it might not see what we see at all. There's a recent study by MIT that was really exciting. It just came out a week or two ago. Researchers 3D printed a tortoise. Imagine a tortoise. And they took a picture of the tortoise, set that aside on the left. On the right, they took this image of the tortoise and they played with the code, some of the structural definitions of the image, what are called signifier bundles. These are things which are not visible to the human eye. They are information patterns within the image that are digital. The computer uses signifier bundles to identify an object. This is like the basic explanation of object recognition. And they changed a few of them. So for what to you and I would look like two pictures of a tortoise, the same tortoise, one, the other, absolutely the same. We could not tell the difference. The computer identified the one on the left, the unchanged one, as a tortoise, and the one on the right as a rifle. It looks the same to us. And so the other thing here is that sometimes when using these digital analysis technologies, we can't see what the computer can see. Just like the computer can't see what we can see. These things are changing, the technology is evolving all the time, and of course there's this big cultural concern for the statements of Elon Musk recently about how AI is going to take over the world and squash us all, and maybe he's right. But until that time, when we're doing this biophilic design research, I think we should keep in mind that we need to take the statements about preference that come from these data strategies, we need to take them carefully. This concern about the end of the world is not new. This is a Hieronymus Bosch from the 1500s, but we have this idea that when our communities collapse, it's attended by ecological destruction and devastation. Rightfully so, it usually has been throughout history. But there's this idea of ecopsychology, that's the modern name for it, again, not a new idea. The premise of ecopsychology is that our sense of self, our idea of our own identity, is always relational. It's always developed through comparison to our environmental conditions and our relationship structures. And so to the extent that there's ecological devastation around us, our well-being and health is compromised. Pretty simple concept. Glenn Albrecht in Australia has developed some really wonderful work around this and his concept of solastalgia, if you're aware of that work. In any case, the premise of biophilic design, and part of the value proposition that I want to talk about now, is this idea that it supports well-being because it offers some idea of stability and security. In a changing world with radically changing environmental and social conditions, potentially there are these environments with a kind of a stability, a kind of holism. It's not just hearkening back to some evolutionary reflex, which we all talk about through E.O. Wilson's work. It's not just hearkening backwards, but it's actually forecasting some point at which we may need to look to these environments that we create, the textures on the walls and the atriums and the rooftop gardens, as some place where we can take some kind of refuge, and that this is a form of psychological stability. This researcher is really brilliant, and I adore her. She's at MIT in the Media Lab. She wasn't able to be here today, but I'm going to talk a little bit about her project just as a demonstration, not because not because it's a technology that I'm using, but just because it's something that I found kind of interesting, just as a straw man for today. So this is a Media Lab project. If you're familiar with the Media Lab, almost all of their projects are stone cold brilliant and kind of speculative and fanciful. You're not totally sure if they'll work, but they may be the future, and you're never quite sure, right? So in this project, she took an EEG headset for the head, heart rate monitor for the wrist, and these vials of scent, right? Of a mechanism that can deploy a particular essential oil on cue. And she created this project as part of her doctoral work at Media Lab to explore how we might augment our responses to our environment with scent in real time. Again, fanciful, speculative, but kind of interesting. I'm going to play a video and you can have a look yourself. I couldn't bring it in here today, not only because she's not here, but because I can't deploy scent in a conference setting. Multiple chemical sensitivities and other sort of regulations prevent me from introducing a sensory component that you can't act against. So this is one of those things where if you're thinking of doing this in your, any research setting that you have, there are limits to what you can introduce in terms of making that augmented reality. But here we go. it's a little ridiculous, right? But it's it's also a little wonderful. Mostly because she's wonderful, and I think the project is really interesting, and she's thinking about it rigorously. But imagine using scent to provoke a user to refocus on their natural environment or to focus on biophilic design elements. There's the potential that for whatever sensory stimulus you can provide through these textures or images, that you could have other things in your office setting or in your home setting, whatever it might be, to the extent that it's protective of human health and is not disruptive for allergies or multiple chemical sensitivities. There's some potential that you could activate other cross-modal relationships and enhance that biophilic response. But I also recognize this as a response to anxiety, a particularly technological response to anxiety. The idea that you would walk around with a vial of lavender oil to calm yourself when your EEG waves suggest that you're anxious or not focusing seems to me to be an externalization of emotional regulation that is particularly of this moment in history, that we would outsource this to a series of things that we strap onto ourselves to make ourselves feel better about the environment. Things are very worrying right now. Whether or not we should actually deploy these technologies to address that is kind of a different question. Consider the lemon. I had a friend in graduate school who wrote her thesis on the scent of lemons in a small Greek village, the village of Naphthia, an island in the south of Greece. I have to say we didn't take her very seriously in the department. We all thought we were doing serious anthropology, and she was writing about lemons, and we couldn't figure out why. And then when I finally read her thesis, it was really interesting. She would sit in these plazas and talk to older people who'd been in the community for a very long time, and she'd ask them about their memories of the past, and they would return again and again to the scent of lemons. The lemons now didn't smell as good, didn't taste as good, they weren't as fresh, they weren't as sharp. You can't remember what the lemon was like, but really when I was a child, lemons were amazing, and now they're not. And so for her experience of this community, the narrative of the community was really centered around this one sensory experience. To talk to that community had to involve some expression of the lemon scent. And I bring this up because I think people throw around this idea of biophilic acupuncture or design-based acupuncture, but knowing where the trigger point is for a particular community around a sensory spectrum, in this instance a lemon, is I think a useful insight for designers as they may be able to get to know those relevant pressure points better. Consider the pine tree. Many of you will have grown up in homes where this is one of your dominant pine tree memories, right? Turns out that you can get Christmas in a bottle. This is what Christmas smells like. It's 2 isomers of pinene, alpha-pinene and beta-pinene, and a bornyl acetate. And so to the extent that you have a smell of Christmas or cleaning products, it's familiar and fresh. That's what it looks like. You can't get that in a bottle. And there are many reasons why. One, it's way too complex. Hundreds of thousands of different compounds in that air that vary by time of day, and they vary by physiology of plants and by season, and they vary by the plant's experience of responses to threats. Are there insects coming through and chewing on leaves? Are there not? All these sorts of things. It's not possible to replicate this. Although some research does suggest that the use of aerosolized essential oils can have an effect on blood pressure and mood. So when you go and visit those forest bathing researchers in Japan or China or Taiwan, the same people who are producing the studies that I've written about, that others have written about, talking about walking through forests, you go into their offices and they all have these aromatherapy things, much more common in Asia, where they have aerosolized hinoki cypress or pine scents, because they believe that they're medicinal, because they believe that they are improving their cognitive performance. So single essential oils aerosolized can have an effect, but you can't replicate that. And the question for biophilic designers is, can we recall this experience of nature, this full-bodied, extraordinary experience hopefully we've all had, whether or not it's this forest, some other forest, for someone who is inside and using biophilic design. That is, can we get to the sensory, the memory imprinting, all of the entrainments that this sensory experience has produced? Can we recall that for someone who's inside using a biophilic design expression. And, if you're interested in scent, you have to wind up in some place like this. This is International Flavors and Fragrances. I'm based in New York or New Jersey, I can't remember. But, they have people hard at work decanting things like orchids in glass vials and coming up with the expression of that scent, the molecules that can help you produce it. The major scent house suppliers keep their information very close to their chests. It's very proprietary. But these can be potential ways to augment your experience of a particular intervention. Again, multiple chemical sensitivities are something you have to be aware of. And also, there's something to be said about having somebody who understands aerosol chemistry and public health on staff. Lemon scent, pine scent, limeine, pinene, the two dominant flavor notes in those two scents, combined with ozone to produce formaldehyde, the carcinogen, right? So, when you introduce these things to your living environments, you have to be clear that you are not making things worse, right? So, those are my thoughts on tech, and I'm moving now into the sort of big picture section, the last third of my presentation, where I'd like to talk a little bit with you about ways in which we can improve the value proposition for biophilic design. In this, context, we all have it, but elevated CO2, nitrous oxides, and temperature in the environment are changing atmospheric conditions. We feel them; they're sensible. Plants feel them more. Some of the plants are responding in ways that we can't predict. A lot of that's under study throughout the world in greenhouses and in field tests. But the CO2 figure, is changing plant metabolism in meaningful ways, including the bioactive compounds and scent signatures which provoke recognition. So it's not just the essential oils that the plants are producing or the nutritional spectrum in the fruits. It's also some of the aerosol chemistry. Walking through a forest may change in some sites. The scents that are decanted in these flavor banks that I just covered may change. This was a hard slide to write for me, but I think it's true, and I want to talk about it. Okay, so the biggest threat to the adoption of biophilic design, in my opinion, is irrelevance. Biophilic design is not going to turn the lights back on in Puerto Rico. It is not going to keep African American men and women from dying in routine traffic stops. It is not going to deliver water to Flint. We have problems. But, biophilic design should not be on the hook for these social problems, okay, and that's a good point. But when we think about biophilic design, the conversation usually runs along two parameters. One is the aesthetic preference, that it's beautiful, that it creates a beautiful environment, and we all deserve to live in beauty, and I believe that. Beauty is important. The other is that it relieves stress. Yes, it probably does. It probably improves physiological outcomes, psychological health outcomes, mental health outcomes, because it does mitigate stress responses in the body. I believe that too. But we can't stop there, because if we stop there, we allow ourselves to become, if not irrelevant, then minimized in the discussion of the extraordinarily grave challenges that we're facing as a planet, both through climate change and through social unrest and grave ecological changes. So it's not just an aesthetic choice, it's not just stress relief. I'm going to go through a couple of ideas that I have about ways that you can map out the benefits of some of these interventions, and then we want to hear from you during the question and answer period. So, let's start at the nuts and bolts piece, making the case for biophilia through materials. There are a lot of these wonderful materials that are coming online, like the mycelium-based bricks, or the bioplastics that have the structure of bone and higher tensile strength than a regular material, or the shoe by Adidas that is made by enzymes. Created this. It's called BioSilk, and when you're done with it, at the end of its lifetime, you can dissolve it in your kitchen sink with an enzyme. It's not on the market yet, but should be next year. There's this idea that perhaps these grown materials can be produced and maintained at scale, and they may perform without some of the substantial costs to human health and the environment that we've seen through other materials, right? And they may also have a biophilic response embedded within them. Although those things are branded and meant and designed to look like, your average product made of whatever toxic material or environmentally intensive material, at some point people may have a kind of educated biophilic response, which says that this is a natural material, or this comes from some place that I can tap into that affinity for. Mapping. Let's return to Amanda's map, right? So it's not just that it creates a peer community. It's not that it allows you, not just that it allows you to geolocate some of these really impressive projects. It also allows you to take those projects and layer on the maps that other people have developed for their outcomes of interest. Top left, my friend Peter James at Harvard Medical School used the Nurses Health Study, the Framingham Nurses Health Database, a nationwide database of 300,000 or 400,000 nurses, where they have all this like global data about their health. And he looked at nighttime lighting, circadian dysregulation, and the incidence of breast cancer. And he found, accordingly, that circadian dysregulation is correlated with the incidence of breast cancer. Another way of putting that is that if you have a building site and you have bird-safe lighting, and you have, the right spectrum of light because you have an ILFI project and you've plugged into that, and you have trees and canopy. If you have changed the circadian experience of your profile of your site, you can plug into data sets like that, and you can make a value proposition which said, and maybe the occupants of my building for whom I've used these strategies, maybe they have a lowered incidence of breast cancer. That's an incredibly powerful statement. Use these maps. Bottom, there's a lot of great work. Because I'm local, part of my role here today is to talk a little bit about work that's being done in the Boston area. So Peter's work, friends at Harvard and MIT, Danny Ibanez is chief among them, have been doing this great work on urban metabolism, where they look at mapping urban sites for their flows of energy and waste materials and all of the other inputs and outputs that consolidate an urban center as an organismic entity to be understood. The ecology of a city, it's not a new thought exactly, but when you look at that, you may be able to look at the way your biophilic project plugs into this idea of urban metabolism. You may be able to make a different case for sustainability through these wastes and flows and energy usages. And then top right is something called iNature. Here's a still from the program. It allows you to use a map of an area and plug in through your app to register that you've seen a particular species and geolocate where you've seen the species. In Boston, we have I believe it's called the Boston Biodiversity Consortium. So that's Harvard's Organismic and Evolutionary Biology Department, Franklin Park Zoo, MIT's Sensible Cities Lab. Number of other partners are working together to create strategies for citizen science, to create strategies for people to register the biodiversity in their immediate area. And to a certain extent, if you are creating those green walls, those green roofs, if you're creating those material structures and niches within your built environment that allow you to have an experience of nature, to orient yourself in the site, and you're increasing biodiversity in your building footprint, then this is some place where you can upload that data and you can map your impact on biodiversity to something like this. I loved this quote because it didn't mince words at all. The study, published in a peer-reviewed journal, eschews the normally sober term of scientific papers and calls the massive loss of wildlife a biological annihilation that represents a frightening assault on the foundations of human civilization. Quote, the situation has become so bad it would not be ethical to use strong language. To not use strong language. So I guess what I'm hoping is that people will begin to use stronger language with their clients when advocating for something like supporting a trophic level that's under threat. There's a recent study produced about a site in Germany it's like a forest that's been monitored for 30 years, and they've had a 70% decline in insects across the board. Not just pollinators, all of them, right? And when you miss whole trophic levels, particularly things at the bottom of the food web, everything goes haywire, right? So don't discount the impact of creating even small niches of habitat and small corridors in your projects, and don't forget to talk about that in the context of biophilic design, because when you say stress relief or when you say beauty, what you're also saying is caring for the site and the place in the way that Amanda talks about, Steve Keller talks about, in the way that and Tim Beatley talks about so convincingly in his Biophilic Cities project. It's a way of talking about the way that you're supporting our ability to exist here, and you need to keep putting that forward in front of clients to use language that accurately talks about where we are. Refuge is another word I want in people's vocabularies. We are facing a tremendous increase in incidence of heat strikes in our cities, and the sensible experience of heat that will cause many cities to have hours during the day where not only people can't work outside safely, and vulnerable populations like young children, pregnant women, immunocompromised people cannot safely spend time outside, but all of us. There will be periods where all of us have difficulty going outside, and these are new patterns of living, and they will create disruptions in the economy and disruptions in the social fabric. And we talk about the use of water features and trees for urban cooling. Everybody's got on board with that. You should be. If you're at this conference in this room, you're on board with that. But this idea of refuge, creating the vision of green, the vision of greenery, the vision of things that are able to live and create something like habitat, needs to be thought of, in my opinion, from the experience of refuge. Because if you're on that city street and you're looking at like a copse of trees in the distance, and you're thinking, only 5 more minutes of walking and I'll be underneath that canopy, right? That's the level at which people are going to be experiencing their public spaces, and I think we need to be on board with that dimension of what biophilic design can create for us. It's not just the copse of trees, but it's the actual format of the building and how we respond to the building, where we think of our buildings as being refuges and interacting with the environment around them successfully. This is the kind of site that would need the experience of refuge, right? No trees. This is on the Toronto waterfront. It's a kind of a poorly used port site, right, that the city has been looking for something to do with for a long time. And they found Sidewalk Labs, one of Google's bets, right? One of the alphabet companies. They've recently announced in articles in City Lab and periodicals all over the world this thing called Quayside, depending on how you pronounce it. It's a 12-acre project on the Toronto waterfront, and I bring it up in closing to situate something else that researchers are going to be, I think, potentially very interested in. Google's design brand, as I understand it, has largely relied on flexibility, highly flexible programming spaces, highly flexible floor plates, structural features that mimic the intellectual flexibility that they want from the lightness, the agility that they want from their workers and from their business model. And in this case, there's some of that flexibility built into this. It's going to house Google's office and also a mixed-use development. But there's also a tremendous input, again, from Sidewalk Labs, which has Google's probably branding DNA, but is a separate entity. A tremendous amount of monitoring technologies. And it's not just the self-driving cars. Everything has a monitor on it to try and be as, quote-unquote, responsive as possible, as optimized as possible, but also harvest reams of data from every activity of every citizen all the time. And I don't know to what degree biophilic design will be part of something like this, but when people are looking at urban-scale research on biophilic design responses, to the extent that biophilic design is part of it, and Google has been at times a really extraordinary patron of biophilic design research, there is some potential that this would be, whenever this thing gets built, if it gets built in this form, because of the level of embedded sensory information or sensors there, could be a kind of extraordinary research site, potentially. But it's this city-scale sort of research that we're missing, and I think, Tim Beatley's movement of the Biophilic Cities Network, when we look at the kind of information that his partners would be able to consolidate, that's going to have to marry at some level the research trends for how you track people through their lives in the course of these biophilic environments and make that value proposition at scale. So that's where I am. And I think we'd like to use the rest of the time to answer some questions, but also, and this could be a time when you all could come up, not just me, but we also want to open up the conversation again about how to make the best value proposition for biophilic design in terms of taking it beyond this conversation about beauty and stress relief. Important things, no doubt. We've got a lot to do, so it would be interesting to hear how you make the case. And thank you for your time and attention this morning.
Okay, are all our mics working? So first, I think it might be good to see if there's any specific questions for Julia's piece. Anyone want to come up to the mic? Because we're filming, we need to take them at the mic. So
There's 2 mics.
there's one there and one there.
Hi, so this is kind of a general question. I was really surprised in this session that there is so much technology included in the conversation about biophilia, because I always thought it was about stepping away from technology. And so I'm curious if you've personally kind of struggled with that tension of how much technology is it appropriate to include in a strategy that's trying to bring us back to our nature and the roots of being in the earth.
Sure.
I can take a crack at that, but love their perspectives as well. I agree with you. I think when the design is deployed and people are living with it, ideally it doesn't have much technology at all. But as researchers and potentially as architects and designers or people who are commissioning projects, there's often a bang for the buck question, a return on investment question, where people are saying, okay, if I choose to invest in this biophilic design strategy, to what extent is it actually going to improve the experience of my occupants and drive value? Return on investment for some clients is productivity. For others, it's just lack of attrition, or it's a branding proposition. You have to find where that is. But the things that we're presenting are not there for the user to enjoy them as much as they are, I think, a sense of how do you make sure that you've put the right thing in place.
I would also say that your opportunities for existing spaces, improving the performance of existing spaces or the biophilic quality of existing spaces, are different from if you're starting from scratch. So from scratch, you may actually have a much more intuitive approach to integrating a biophilic experience, but that's not always we don't always have that opportunity. Oftentimes, you have an urban space that really needs some greater assessment. But I think for many of us, research-oriented people, kind of also just really like to understand what it is that we are promoting and how it does affect us.
Yeah, I think for myself, I'm pretty conflicted, actually. I do feel like biophilic design is a call for us to reconnect with nature and rely less on technology. But at the same time, technology can really help us research to understand how to take the practice further. And to be more effective as we move to a wider adoption of biophilic design. So I agree it's a real conflict for me as well. But I think some of these tools, and I think Katie really illustrated it really well, and that you can go visit locations or other examples of buildings through technology and then be able to express the biophilic design attributes of that project in a way that may be more compelling for people than just still images or descriptions. I think that's a really great example of a compelling way that you can use technology to really then increase your ability to connect people in nature. So yeah, but it's a conflict for sure.
But I would also add that part of the intent here is not just on the measuring, but also the communicating the story. So if technology can help us communicate or inspire people to adopt biophilic design, then it seems like a pretty reasonable approach.
So just while we're going to, I'll take your question in just a second. I want to just mention two things. One is that we're running a Twitter wall here, so if you would like to tweet, use the hashtag biophilic design or biophilic map. It will show up on here, which is a great way to kind of get people's reactions. But also, I guess there's an app with the session that I didn't know about until a little while ago, where people have been posting questions. So as well as taking questions here, we'll read a couple questions out that have been posted through that as well.
Hi, thanks for excellent presentations. Hi, Katie. I guess what could really drive biophilia to the mainstream regarding workspaces is the business case. If we can demonstrate to developers, owners, that their workers will be more productive through biophilic design, then it'll drive the market. So I'm curious to know if there's already some research regarding connection between biophilia and productivity.
Well, I can start with, that is the impetus behind the Economics of Biophilia that was published in 2012 by Terrapin. And it started with that very question. You know, we were pushing this idea. We knew that biophilic design was the right way to go, but we were always faced with this question of like, well, that's a great idea, but who's going to pay for it, and why should we pay for it? And so to get buy-in, we've realized that we had to actually be able to make the case through known examples. And so the Economics of Biophilia, which is available for free on our website, really outlines that argument for 6 or 5 sectors of society: education, healthcare, workplace, community, and schools, I believe. So looking at what the desired outcomes are for each of those different sectors, and how biophilic design that we knew of as of then had really had a positive impact, and then what the relationship was to either return on investment or other savings, financial connection there. So when that was published, we found a huge uptick in interest and people willing to not only implement the designs, but experiment and invest in understanding biophilic design more. So there is research out there. It does exist, but it's not necessarily as robust a body of that it could be, and that's partly why having these kind of tools and technologies to advance that research can help, again, support more that shows the return.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to continually be making the case for things that, you know, probably for many of us in this room are intuitively smart ways to be living and designing, but we do have to be making the case. And, you know, to have good research data on productivity increases helps us make the case often. So I think with the Biophilic Design Initiative, we have identified quite a lot of research that could really help us make the case and get more traction. And, you know, we'll be looking in the future to try and identify funding and resources and collaborations for us to do even more of that and build on the great work that Terrapin's already done.
I think the collaborations we need to find people who are willing to be to divulge what those savings or cost or productivity. I think people are a little bit more willing to put their data out there in public. But when it comes to financials, it's a little harder to find somebody to commit to that. And so a collaborative effort with multiple entities, or somebody who's just really understands the value to the larger community, and says, you know, being able to communicate our financial benefits from implementing biophilic design. That's when we're going to start to see more of a case. So if we can find those people who are in different sectors, both in retail and restaurateur and hotels and so on, if we can find those people who are willing to commit to engaging in those case studies and research, that would be fantastic for the movement.
And if I may, I'd like to just add one quick thing. Well, you know, first is that I think it's important that when we think of wellness and cognitive performance and all of the things that help employees stay happy where they are, we have to think of them in the context of the greater wellness program of the company or site. It's not going to work to think about how many trees you should place outside your office window so you can have a view of a canopy, but then not give people time off for a sick child or a sick parent, right? There's a whole context of what stress ecology is for the individual, and trees aren't going to resolve it if you're not taking care of business on the other end. So I think there's a larger conversation. Again, this goes to my point about trying to link biophilic design to other interventions. It's a really important amenity. It's a really important humane extension that we can offer to people in the environments where they work, live, and play. But it must be taken in context with these other things. And I just want to make a shameless plug for a former colleague. Jia, can you raise your hand? Jia Yin over there is a doctoral student at the Harvard School of Public Health, and they have people working on stress, they have people working on workplace ecology and well-being, and then they have him working on virtual reality and biophilic design environments. And if you can find that ecology of groups of researchers, pods of them, who can attack the problem holistically, you will get better research out of it.
So there were a few questions on the on this app that I'd like to read.
Actually, one of them kind of falls nicely to follow your comment about. Actually, did you find it?
But we've also got people lining up.
I know.
We should do speed dating with this because we've got 8 minutes, we've got people there, and we've got the Twitter. So.
Well, we'll just read a couple of questions. This is from the app that people have been putting questions throughout the session. So, in what way can interior designer or architects use EEG headsets for our work, or are they used more by researchers? That was a question for Kate.
So to Julia's last point, there are the architects, interior designers, landscape, anybody in the design community can engage with research teams to help to do the research itself, but the technology that I was showing is actually stuff that you can get online for not that expensive. However, actually taking that data and applying it to your work requires a little bit more rigor. It can be done. I would encourage collaboration among with other industry experts. So not just taking on the work yourself. There can be a learning curve, but it is feasible. You just need to take the time to understand and lay out what you're actually trying to achieve and how to do it in a way that the results are valuable and worth sharing.
So we will have virtual reality headsets down in booth 2238. Someone also asked where they were going to be. And you're going to be there.
I don't know. Somebody will be there to help you.
All right.
Hi. I'm currently studying the preferences of biophilic attributes in workspaces, and as you would know, that biophilic design is not a one-size-fits-all approach. Like men and women react differently to certain attributes. It also varies depending on the age of the person. So as a designer, how would one decide what attribute or pattern best suits the place, because you don't know who's going to occupy that space?
Yeah, I think one of the things we've been trying to do with the tools and resources coming out, especially with the case studies, is really break down the sort of false impression that biophilic design is about just adding some plants into the space, and that there's lots of different ways to connect people to nature. And I think you sort of saw that in the 3 presentations today. So, our cultural connections, our multi-sensory connections, as well as the connection to place and the direct connection to nature. So, I think what we're really trying to do in this initiative and in all of our work is really illustrate that it's, as complex as nature itself. And, there's different aspects of biophilic design that may be right for one project, one location, and not right for another.
On this issue of scent, for instance, just by way of example, the highest scent acuity is found in young women who are non-smokers and women who reflect on their body weight as being just right. If you reflect on your body weight as being too thin or too high, your sense of sensory acuity to scent is statistically less. They found this is a very interesting finding, right? So one of the things is, know your population if you can. Know where their trigger points are, both for the things that you think they'll respond to, but also the cues that they'll pick up reliably. And to the extent that you can, try and cater to that or to what their needs will be.
So for any given project, there are certain more universal attributes that you can consider, largely having to do with creating that sense of place. So what is the local ecology, climate, and so on. Those can be positive for any number of populations. But then when you get down to some places are going to be highly designed for a particular user group, and other ones need to be a lot more flexible. And that's just something that you have to consider when you start getting to more refined biophilic design strategies.
There's a question there.
I'd like to yield to Jan.
I have to leave. Hi, Julia.
Hi, Dan.
Great job. I had a question for the audience. Recently had it so amazing that you brought up the scent thing, because I just had one of our largest clients, and I actually brought up, I use a diffuser in my office. It calms me down. I'm like, this is great. Does anybody in the audience ever work with, I know there's scenting in hotels, but you're stuck with that scent. Like I go into this one hotel every time, I almost get a headache, right? So we thought of an idea of having a sensor, like when you go in your office, you could press a button, I want lavender today or this or that. Has anybody ever used scent in the corporate world, in the office environment, where, anybody? Oh, great, you just came up with a great idea. So I just thought, well, why not take a sensor when somebody goes into a room and says, you know, I'd like this type of scent in my office to calm me down, and it kind of spurts it out instead of having it on a necklace. I just wasn't sure if anybody has ever used scent like that in the corporate world, but I guess no. I was thinking of drop-down stations in an office, like if, you know, some people just go into one office that you can just like a drop-down, or in individual offices possibly, but in an open space you have the allergy thing and all that. That's, you know.
I think
Let's have, because they're filming and they're going to want everybody on a mic, so maybe they could come and chat with you.
Okay, after. So the other thing
Yeah.
is there is a great website for some studies you asked about productivity in biophilic design, green plants for green buildings, gpgb.org. And Terrapin obviously is great, amazing studies there, but there's a good compilation of studies on biophilic design. So that was it. Thank you.
actually to follow up on that, there was a lot more information that we all wanted to talk about today, but obviously can't. So on Terrapin's blog, there is a blog posting that actually talks a little bit more about each of these main issues and then provides several links for each of those topics. And some of them are very targeted to the conversations that we had today, and others go off on in slightly different directions. So it's kind of a fun collection of additional reading. The website is a little long, so I didn't include it on one of our slides, but I can give it to you following this, or you can go into Terrapin's blog and you'll find it right there. It's the same name as our session here today.
And we've got a minute to. You want to ask one more question?
Hi, I would like to ask, looking at kind of the citizen science model, is there any thought to reaching out beyond professional designers to communities, individuals who might want to do this almost on a do-it-yourself kind of basis? Because there's no way professional design can reach even a small fraction of people who would like to know more about this.
Yes, actually, that is kind of the model, the neurocartography project that I talked about. It's volunteer-based, and the project that we are hoping to do with Gensler Interface and the Cloud Lab, participants are all volunteers, and that is actually, if they are volunteering in an activity like that, and the data is aggregated, it doesn't become a health research concern and privacy. So there's ways that it makes the information more accessible, but also the people who can participate and your ability to actually create research projects like that. It's more accessible to architectural teams and to engage the community. They feel like they have some more ownership over the outcomes.
More on the implementation side, not the research side. You live in a small town somewhere, you think, oh, I really want some biophilia for my school, civic organization. You don't even know where to find information, rather than on the purely research side. I think that would be a great area for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to reach the general public without doing a lot of intense kind of market research on how to reach groups of the general public. We've started by trying to get to architects, designers, owners, academics, engineers, with the first round of resources that we're putting out. it'll grow. And I think Tim Beatley's Biophilic Cities work is really looking at a different scale as well, and working with municipalities to sort of do wider reach. So I think there's lots of different initiatives focused on reaching different sectors of the population, but we can grow it for sure.
And one other point about that, Tim has brought on somebody, J.D. Brown, who is responsible for biophilic codes. So basically he's got somebody on staff who's got training, legal training, whereby he goes through city codes and he looks for ways in which they support the implementation of biophilic design, which may not speak to the problems of a rural community per se, but he can give examples from across the country and increasingly across the world of different ways in which municipalities are codifying the use of these design principles, right? And I think that when that becomes a sort of a more standard model, when the legal framework is understood, then it becomes that and the economic case are what make this easier. I'm afraid we're out of time, sir.
But yeah, we'll be here for a little bit. Happy to answer your questions. Sorry we didn't get time for them all.
Thank you again for coming.
Thank you, everybody.
And good luck.
You.